Okay. Hi everyone. Sorry, just turned on my camera. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Uh, we just get started now, and as time goes on, more people are going to join. I think it's very early into the meeting. So, um, sorry. My name is Praising Mafidon, and I'm part of the AppSec Network, popularly known as TAN. And sorry. Abigail, please, can you just help me with admitting so that I can just focus on this? Thank you. My name is Crazy Mafidon, and I'm part of TAN, which is also known as the AppSec Network. And for those of you who are new here and you're not part of TAN, what we do at TAN here is TAN is a community focused on helping and collaborating with application security engineers in order to increase and also widen their knowledge in AppSec skills. So we are open to beginners, developers, advanced, and other people in cybersecurity wanting to move into AppSec, but they don't know the direction to start from or come from. So we host webinars, we host challenges, we host sessions like this, we host trainings as well. We usually open applications once every 3 months. So the next application for joining the community will be open next month. And here with me, we have Modupe Akintan. Sorry about that. I think I didn't pronounce it correctly. Modupe Akintan. Modupe is, hi Badmos. Modupe is a privacy engineer at Amazon. And today she'll be taking us on a whole new journey, right? What she does as a privacy engineer at Amazon, how privacy engineering looks like, how it also still exceeds and also still enters the realm of AppSec. So we're going to be learning a whole lot from Modupe. So I think I'm going to pause here and pass it over to Modupe so she could, quickly introduce herself to us and then take us through the rest of the session. Modupe, please, I'll be handing over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Praise. Thank you so much. Yeah, happy to be here to just give this talk. When Praise reached out to me, I was excited to just like preach privacy to anybody because that's what I do and that's what I love. Yeah, today we're talking about like what privacy engineering is and why you should even care about it. Just a bit about me. Okay, I did my undergrad in computer engineering from Afebala University, and then got interested in cybersecurity at the time. And then from there, did my NYC at PwC in their cybersecurity and privacy team. And that was my first intro into privacy, as like how it actually works in like a company. And I got really interested in privacy, particularly about the focus that I had on like human rights and like on people in particular. So I wanted to grow that knowledge. After that, I went on to do my master's in computer science, specializing in network security at Stanford University. I spent about 2 years there doing my master's. During that time, too, I interned at Apple, where I worked at the user privacy engineering team to help do some research for like their privacy features. And also during that time, I discovered tech policy as a whole and got interested in that space. And because of the kind of person I am, obviously had to feed the new interest. And so I tried filling that interest and eventually discovered that there was like a gap for people that actually were coming from a technical background to enter into tech policy. So a few friends of mine and I met them. They reached out to me about like starting this like tech policy fellowship called the Paragon Policy Fellowship. And what we did was basically we worked with state and local government partners to come up with like policy briefs, guidelines for handling things like AI, emerging technologies, and stuff like that. And currently, I work as a privacy and AI engineer at Amazon. So my job is basically privacy engineering side of things, and also like I work on AI compliance, AI governance, AI safety at Amazon too for their internal applications. And yeah, other interests I have: trust and safety, AI safety, tech policy. My hobbies: I love watching movies and also shopping, and not just clothes shopping, but also like things like grocery shopping. Okay. Um, so privacy. We've heard like I'm hearing this a lot, or rather I'm saying this a lot. So what exactly is the origin of privacy? Um, so I want to talk about particularly in the US and in the EU because those are like two major players in when it comes to privacy and setting the standards for privacy. So for the US Constitution came into effect in like 1978, and while not explicitly like stating privacy, like the Supreme Court has since then found that Constitution actually provides the right to privacy in the first, third, particularly Fourth Amendments, and this is just basically the right to be left alone or let alone. Um, this was also followed up by a 1890 Harvard Law Review, which was written primarily by Justice Brandeis. I hope I'm not butchering the name, but basically he addressed the rights for privacy. This was like the first particular instance at the time that addressed the right of privacy or the right to be let alone. It's one of the most influential essays of American history. The authors basically charged that instantaneous photographs and newspaper enterprises have invaded the sacred precincts of private and domestic life, and basically seek to consider whether existing law affords a principle which can properly be invoked to protect the privacy of an individual. Then we have like a Supreme Court ruling between Katz v. United States in 1967, which was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court and extended to Fourth Amendment protections against unlawful searches and seizures beyond citizens' homes and properties to anywhere a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. And then after that, just to skip ahead, because obviously a bunch of things did happen every time, but current state is basically now the US has a bunch of sectorial laws. So we have things like HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it was done in 1996 and was created to basically streamline the flow of healthcare information and protect PII maintained by healthcare and health insurance industry. Then we have also like COPA, which is the Child's Online Privacy Protection Act, and it became a US federal law in 1998. And it pertains to basically online gathering of personal data by entities in the US about children under the age of 13 years, both in and outside the US. And then also we have like state laws. In 2003, California was the first state to implement data protection notification laws. And this new legislation basically required businesses and state agencies to disclose when California's personal information was exposed in a cybersecurity breach. And then let's move on to the EU. And the EU took a different approach to how they eventually got to privacy, which was a human rights approach. So after some time in World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights basically came up and it became a thing. And then following from that, the EU basically um, had privacy grounded in human rights, particularly in Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. And it protects the right to private life and family life. And it was influenced, like I said, by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Um, yeah, and then go on to like 1995, where the Data Protection Directive was created, and it's a comprehensive framework requiring organizations to process personal data lawfully, fairly, and proportionately across EU member states. But again, there was a problem with this because only member states had to implement this into law, and there was disparities between how they were implementing into law, and it caused fragmentation. So then come 2018, which was the first instance of where GDPR was signed into law and became federal law. And basically, federal regulation, sorry. GDPR replaced the directive and made those obligations directly enforceable across the EU. So it strengthened individual rights, formalized privacy by design and by default, and imposed like accountability requirements that directly affects like system architecture. And I wanted to include the EU AI Act because not necessarily like it's focused on privacy, but it does have an implication because one thing we've seen so far is that privacy engineers or privacy professionals have been tasked with taking on the work of AI governance, AI safety in some instances. So I wanted to include that because the EU AI Act basically addresses governance for AI systems, and it takes like a risk-based approach for addressing AI systems. So now, okay, sorry. Okay. So yeah, what is privacy? I've been saying this a lot, but again, what is privacy? So data privacy is a principle that individuals should have control over their personal data, including the ability to decide how organizations process their data. And as you can see, I highlighted like two words. I highlighted personal data and also process because those like definitions are very important when it comes to privacy because once you understand exactly what personal data is and what constitutes your processing, you kind of know how to start thinking about things from the start. But if you fail in those definitions, then everything starts falling apart. So yeah, and let's go to what personal data means. So I pulled this directly from GDPR's definition of personal data, but it kind of transcends to other laws or regulations that we base privacy on. So it basically means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. And an identifiable natural person or is one who can be identified directly or indirectly. And that is very important to note because sometimes what I've seen is like when people think of personal data and identify or identifiable, they think of, you know, name and address. And I will talk about that in the next slide. I also like examples. And as you can see, examples of personal data. So we have things that people obviously would think of, which is like name, email address. Well, at least I hope people think of email address as personal data because it is. But yeah, name, email address, phone number, your address, where you live, things that are also personal data. User ID is personal data. So when you don't necessarily have to, I don't know, store the name. If you're storing like a user ID, you know, customer ID or whatever, that's personal data too, because it can be tracked or tied back to an individual. Just think about this way: anything that can be tied back to an individual is personal data. If I can maybe do a bit of like, I don't know, computation or aggregation and determine exactly who you are, that's personal data. So we have account number, credit card info, IP address is personal data, cookie identifiers are personal data, device IDs are personal data, GPS coordinates, particularly generally geolocation information is personal data. And then other than personal data, we also have a separate category, which is called sensitive personal data. And this is basically types of personal data that affect the rights of an individual. So it reveals like information about like your political opinions, health related data, biometric data, things like that, a different category. So, but just to note, based on where you are, things like child data, I know like GDPR doesn't necessarily states that child data is sensitive personal data, but in US regulation, it does fall under that category, just to note. Yeah. And then what is processing? Processing means any operation or set of operations which is performed on personal data or a set of personal data. And this includes collection. And I wanted to state this because, particularly when I talk to people about what processing means, they automatically think of, I don't know, performing like computations or analytics on data. Not necessarily. As much as you're just collecting the data, that is a processing activity. And that's important to note. So anything you're doing with it, think about this like picture like, I don't know, this is my lip gloss. I don't know. The fact that I'm collecting it is me processing it. Did you get? It's not just necessarily me using the lip gloss. It's like anything I do with the data, that's processing activities. And it's important to note that because then you start knowing how to think about how to handle data. So yeah, privacy versus security, the big beef that we have nowadays. So yeah, let's look at differences and also I'll highlight like similarities. So data privacy focuses on the individual rights of data subjects, that is like users who own data, while data security focuses on protecting the data. Privacy talks more about controlling your data, while security is more about protecting the data. And but at the same time, they work hand in hand because data privacy reinforces data security by defining the rights people and the right reasons for any set of data. Same with data security, it reinforces data privacy by ensuring that only the right person or people have access to personal data. So think about it like this. As a privacy engineer, my work is not complete if I'm not considering security. It's actually a component of that. I have to think about security, access control, and things like that. The same way, security is not complete if you don't consider privacy. That's something that you should know. So they both reinforce that. And yeah, you will see like even like currently a bunch of things like even as things are ramping up like standards and frameworks for security, they are starting to like include privacy because it's very, very important. Okay, what is privacy engineering? Because now I gave like a background on what privacy is, but what particular is privacy engineering? So, privacy engineering is the technical side of privacy profession. It's basically the implementation of privacy by design principles through technical design. And we're basically the tech professionals of privacy. So I had someone explain to me recently, like the different buckets of privacy engineers. Like even though it seems straightforward, but they actually have wear like different hats on different days. Some days we're more of a privacy architect, which is we're basically trying to um, design features or controls to kind of help meet our privacy obligations. Some days we are more software engineers where we're actually just people that have software engineering background or something, maybe a security background, and we're trying to implement privacy like threat modeling or actually engineering and building solutions to actually meet privacy obligations. So it could be various things. Like if you even look online, look for privacy engineering jobs, you won't necessarily see you will see the differences in like the job description. And you kind of get a sense of like what exactly each person does. Um, so yeah, at companies large and small, dozens of disciplines are involved in building like the future of privacy projects. While teams may often wear like multiple hats, like I said, they might be responsible for more far than privacy. So like same like I said, like my job extends to just more than privacy. At the same time, a privacy team should like include multiple points of view. So like if you look at people that are privacy engineers, their backgrounds, most of them came from security. We have people that came from like a data science background, people that came from the security background, software engineering background, some from like we have lawyers. Like it's like a whole, it's like this football team basically that comes and brings like various perspectives and informs like how we actually design privacy controls and features and meet obligations. So yeah, privacy by design means nothing more than just data protection through technology design. So behind this is the thought that data protection in data processing procedures is best adhered to when it's already integrated in technology. So what privacy by design is trying to drive is basically we don't want to just go by the checklist approach which we were going by before. We want to start integrating privacy into the design. So meaning like when you're thinking about building an application in your pre-design phase, we want to start asking questions about privacy. How can we build this application to ensure that we have privacy embedded in it so that we can meet the obligations? So we have a bunch of privacy by design principles, and I listed some there. And we have things like be proactive, not reactive. And that's like you don't want to just wait till something bad happens to build privacy into an application or a feature. You want to build preventive measures or control to prevent that from happening. Because what we've seen, and I think it was similar in the security space, we saw that where people tend, in the beginning, it was more about, oh, let's wait till this happens, before I build protection. And then the Google incident happened, which changed at least a bunch of things in the security space. So yeah, then we have privacy as default setting, which I feel like I've already addressed. And then we have privacy embedded into design, for full functionality, positive sum, not zero sum. Basically, just talk about privacy doesn't have to be compete with functionality or security. It's not a trade-off here we want to get. His goal is to kind of have like this sum design, meaning that instead of like picking between privacy and security, we are creating this perfect equation to like add both of them and sum both of them up. So it's not really a trade-off. So and then we have end-to-end security. So meaning like from the point at which users provide personal data to when it is destroyed, everything between privacy by design like should ensure the security of this data through like lifecycle processing. Again, this goes back to the point where I said like our job as privacy engineers is not complete until we think about security and protecting the data. Then we have visibility and transparency. This is just going into like providing um, users with information on exactly what data is collected, what data is, why it is collected, how it is used. It's very important that you provide that because it's actually mandated. Okay. So just a case study to kind of give an idea of um, why privacy engineering is even necessary or why we even need it. Because I'm sure some people are like, obviously, like the thought comes to mind, okay, do we really need this? Just to give an example. So according to the GDPR, according to GDPR, users have a right to erase your data. In case you're not aware of this, like just know this now. And also, just because I know I'm using GDPR a lot, and that sounds like, oh my god, it's the EU. What's that relevant to us in Nigeria? Nigeria has the NDPA, which actually is an equivalent act that has us to like comply to like privacy obligations. So again, you have the same rights that the EU has, and like almost all countries have the same rights. So now for deletion, you have the right to erasure, which is also known as the right to be forgotten. So like this right is absolute, and companies have a month to respond to this request. So how this plays out is like, for example, me as a user, I could request from, let's say, Facebook that I want my data deleted. Obviously, there are some things that are going to play, like, okay, why do you want to delete this data? I think there's, or rather, there are some conditions that happen where you cannot actually delete your data. For example, if this data is necessary to perform safety of an individual, something like that. But again, 90% of the time you actually be able to honor this request. So once I tell, like, for example, these companies, I want my data deleted, they have 1 month to, respond to this request. And it sounds easy, but it's not actually easy because one thing about like data flowing through a company is that when it comes in at one point, it moves and it goes to different places. So you think about, okay, it comes from like an app, API calls are made and it's returned. And then for some reason, the analytics team, they want the data to perform something or something else. And then, it keeps on spreading within the team. So now you have to think about something else now. Like you're thinking about, okay, how is data even flowing in this particular company? How can I track data flow? How can I like keep track of the authority source and how data is even modified? How do I even verify that data is actually deleted in all these particular systems? So like that is not exactly a legal regulatory problem per se. It becomes like a distributed system problem. Then you have to ask about things like, oh, how do I do data lineage mapping? How can I build an orchestrated like workflow to handle this? Because what you want is that a perfect system here is basically going to be, once a user says delete, automatically all the systems are already tied together, have the data, and just automatically clears and deletes from the system. That would be a perfect setting, you get. But how do you build that? And like one thing you realize is that as the size of the company increases, rather, the scale of like the problem increases. Like it's harder to solve like privacy problems, and that's the need for privacy engineers, because you can't just rely on manually doing things. You have to think about how to automate these things, how to make it easier, build like workflows or whatever to handle these situations. So just to give an idea of like just some kind of problems that we have to deal with internally. Um, so yeah, I want to talk about this pseudonymization and anonymization, because I personally have an ick, if you call, for how people like mix this, and I wanted to really explain this today. So, pseudonymous data and anonymous data. So understanding the difference between these two is very important, because GDPR, it determines whether GDPR applies or not. According to the GDPR, if data is anonymous, truly anonymous, you don't have to meet any of these obligations. And again, there are a bunch of obligations. And I know I only talked about the right to erasure. There's also right to have your data rectified. There's so many other things that you have rights to. But if your data is actually truly anonymous, or actually stored or whatever as anonymous, or whether as anonymous data or whatever, you don't have any privacy obligation, which is a big thing, because meaning that you don't have to go through all this, jump through hoops to do a bunch of things. But again, it is very hard to make data anonymous, and I'll explain that. But basically, pseudonymous data is basically personal data in such a way that personal data can no longer be attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. So I know before I talked about user ID. That's an example of pseudonymization. So instead of storing the person's name, I'm storing, random numbers that basically identify an individual. So you're not necessarily storing like the exact identifier that was given the name, or like, name, age. You're finding other ways kind of like store that information. So some ways that you can pseudonymize data is like tokenization, which is like replacing identifiers with token, hashing, using cryptographic functions to obscure data, encryption, that's securing data with particular encryption keys. And then when it comes to anonymization, this is the way to turn personal data into anonymous information, so in a way that it cannot be tied back to an individual, no matter what you do. And again, this is very hard. It looks, you might be thinking, oh, how hard can that be? It's easy, well, if you don't collect personal data, but if you want to still have personal data in some form or some way to perform some particular processing activities, it's hard to achieve truly anonymous data. And some ways to do this is like aggregation, which is basically combining data to show trends without like exposing individual records. So, for example, instead of storing or sharing individual salaries, I publish like, let's say, salaries by department. So I'm aggregating the data per se, not necessarily like just publishing the exact salary for each individual, but saying, oh, this is the range of salaries for this particular department. I'm not tying that to be an individual. So that is it. And again, I'm sure you're thinking, why is that not anonymous? Is that not you're not actually providing the exact salary? Well, the thing is that based on the information you have in the data sets, you can actually tie it back to an individual. So, for example, now it's just by department. Like now, imagine a department that has like 8 people. I can do 2 plus 2 and eventually tie back to what you possibly be earning, or who the individual exactly is. So it's not exactly what we define as anonymization. And then you have things like data masking, generalization, um, basically key anonymity, which was introduced in like 1998. It's just built on the idea that by combining sets of data with similar attributes, identifying information about any of the individuals contributing to the data can be obscured. So it means like basically each record in a data set should be not be able, sorry, each um, basically you want to say like each record in data set should not be able to be distinguished from another record in data set, at least by k minus one like records with respect to like certain identifying attributes. I know that's a lot, and like again, this is like things that bleed into like the data science part of like or machine learning part of like privacy engineering. But yeah, so yeah, data generation basically is just like a way of using, they use key anonymity to basically substitute a specific value for a more general one. And then we have things like differential privacy, which is like noise addition. It's basically a rigorous mathematical definition of privacy. This is usually the most popularized thing people use. Well, thing they use, but again, it's hard to achieve. And it looks simple, but it's really hard to achieve. It's an entire mathematical formula, and you have to basically calculate that. So it's basically you're trying to, you have an algorithm that analyzes the data sets and computes statistics about it such that the algorithm will be differentially private, meaning that if I take out a record from that particular data set, I should not be able to tell that data set even changed. I should not be able to identify anybody from the data set. I should not be able to like tell anything from that. And all they do is like basically like introduce like noise to the data set, and that's how you're kind of like able to do that. Um, but yeah, it's basically like you're making a promise that contributing your data will not harm your future utility by more than a particular epsilon value. And the epsilon is just like, think of it like a, I don't know, a metric they use to determine exactly how well you're meeting your privacy obligation. So for just for context, an epsilon of 0.1 is basically saying that I will not harm, no harm will come to your data more than 11%. And again, that's very, very hard to meet. And I don't want to go into that because of time, but yeah, you can look that up and like you understand exactly why it's hard to eat. I think if you look up, there's a conference called Privacy Engineering Practice. They have a lot of talks about like differential privacy and why it's actually hard to actually implement in practice well. Then privacy enhancing technologies. So there's no actual unified definition for this, but I just try to like define that. So it basically refers to innovations that facilitate the processing and use of data in a way that preserves the privacy of individuals whose data is being used. Usually you will not really see like one just being used in some context. You usually see like a bunch or two used in like everything. And just to highlight, this doesn't mean that if you use this particular thing, your data is anonymous. It doesn't mean that. The only two that, if done well, make your data anonymous is synthetic data and differential privacy. But I'm sure like most of you know about like homomorphic encryption. Basically, like the benefits that it provides is like, oh, secure data sharing and collaboration, secure outsourcing of computations or processing for third parties and things like that. Then we have secure multi-party computation. It supports like data minimization principle, and that's basically the principle that we have in privacy, and again backed by GDPR, where you should not be collecting more data than you need. Very important. That solves a lot of problem. For example, let's say, let me give an example. I have an application, and in the information gathering stage, basically like the initial form that I have to fill out my details, I'm asking for things like, I don't know, NIN, when I know I have no use case for that. Do you understand? Like data minimization basically tells you like you need to think about everything you're collecting and actually think about the business use case. So do I really need to collect this data? That's the basic question you need to ask yourself, and that kind of like helps you minimize data. um, the federated learning basically, it enables like different parties to train models using distributed data without exposing it to each other or like to a third party. So basically, I have a data set, you have a data set. I don't want you to see my data set. It's like a way for me to kind of like use your data set without actually seeing it. So yeah, this also enables like secure data sharing, and then we have zero knowledge proofs, which allows you to verify knowledge without revealing any necessary data to prove it. This also helps supports like data minimization principle, secure data sharing, and then synthetic data. In literally in the word like data that basically replaces you're basically generating artificial data um, with real data, and this, while it might seem like okay this is fake data now, there's no way it can be there's no way it can be actual personal data, but not necessarily. You still have to comply with like regulations. So it doesn't automatically create anonymous data, because like while it has like it provides like privacy protection, there's certain things that you need to consider, because there are attacks that can happen. Like it has been proven that you can actually trace back the original data that was used to generate identity data by just like things like membership influence attacks and stuff like that. So yeah, and then I talked about differential privacy already, and that's one also like also one of those privacy preserving technologies. Yes. Okay. So And now with all this I've said, I said a whole bunch of things you probably might not even remember. But with all these things, like why should application security engineers even care about this? So yeah, I tried to, you know, create three high level points of why I think you should care about it. There are a bunch of reasons because, yeah, I personally think that piracy is an amazing field to be in. But just generally, security vulnerabilities are piracy vulnerabilities. So if you look up the OAP's like top 10 piracy risk, and I don't think they've done one recently, but I think the last one they did was 2021. But the first piracy vulnerability or piracy risk was basically web application vulnerabilities. So just to paint the picture, do you understand? Like it is very, very important. Like whatever happens to you affects us. Like again, that's why I said like we are not completely doing privacy well if we're not thinking about security. Same thing for security. If you're not thinking about privacy, you have more to deal with in some sense. You get because if you're collecting more data than you need, you have to protect that data you're collecting. Why not reduce the scope of your work? So that's one. But that's how it ties into each other in one form. So also like privacy is baked into like standards now. If you look at standards like ISO 27001, SOC 2, and even like the OAPS, like application security standard, they have like a section on like um guidelines for establishing like a modern application security program. And like one of the first things they talk about is like establishing like a risks based approach for portfolio approach. And like the first thing they literally said was that make sure like it should be driven by privacy laws or regulations to ensure that data is protected. So like again, like people are recognizing like, or even for a while now, like you cannot do security without privacy. So like if you look at standards, you almost always see about like data protection or privacy listed in like standards. Um, yeah, final reason which I think is maybe the most important reason is that you're already doing part of the work. So why not just extend it? It's all about asking extra questions. So when you're, doing AppSec reviews or whatever, just think about things like, okay, this thing that I'm even doing, like I have this data I have access to, or whatever that like I think we're collecting, do we even need it? You can just like raise the bar and just like ask difficult questions like, okay, why are we actually collecting this data? Like, do we need it? Like, what's actually the business use case? Like, can we do without it? Like, things like that. So just extend your work. I think that's why it's important. Because at the end of the day, just to add, we are also human beings too. It's also our data that's being used somewhere somehow. So at least if you champion things like that, you can kind of start a chain. Just a case study. So just wanted to go through like a case study of like how a hypothetical case study of how like for example an application and how we think about things for like an AppSec side. So let's look at a real example. So let's say I'm conducting a piracy review for a mobile fitness app, and it tracks workouts, it logs meals, records like GPS running routes, and lets users like connect with their friends. So and most of the time, I don't know if any of you have used like all these like workout apps, but they connect to your Apple Watch just to provide context. So basically, just from things we discussed, I mentioned like GPS routes. That's obviously location data, and then like if it's connected to your Apple Watch, that's definitely going to be health data, which is sensitive. Just to note. So yeah, so one thing that we want to consider is okay, like data collection and minimizing data collection. So now imagine an instance where we find that the API for analytics basically was capturing workout payloads and GPS coordinates and meal logs. In my mind, in at least my mind, maybe I'm wrong, analytics is just about performance or trying to improve performance, and I don't see why GPS coordinates is needed for that situation. So that's kind of thing that you want to think about. What are you actually returning back? Then things like purpose limitation too. Imagine like we found that the workouts data collected for the workout that found that the workouts data collected for fitness tracking and was being used or shared with a third party. So example, the GDPR basically requires you to limit purpose. So meaning that not just limit purpose, but also state your purpose for collection. So meaning before I even collect data, I want to state my purpose, like why am I collecting data? And that's why you see, I know if most of you like download apps, you see like they ask you to like agree to like a privacy policy. Just as an assignment, just like go and actually look at the policy. You see that actually states what they're planning to use your data for. Like they have to do it. So imagine now you state that I want to use your data for, I don't know, let's say improving performance. And then I'm selling your data to a third party. That is expanding the scope of the purpose, and you're basically not limiting purpose. So that's a bad thing to think about too. Or that's something to think about and a bad thing. So again, I talk about data deletion too. You have no way to handle data deletion when a user requests for data to be deleted. It's just like it's. I know usually people do, depending on the skill, they do things like, you know, oh, dedicated email addresses kind of handle that, but just saying, I don't think that's the best thing to do. And then also, how are you verifying deletion, things like that. So insufficient DI identification. Basically the app stores GPS coordinates. So GPS coordinates will tell you the exact location you were at. You don't have to do that. Another better way to do that is, like, for instance, instead of storing exact GPS coordinates, you could store like aggregates of location. Could be like maybe zip codes. Maybe you're only storing, what country they belong to, things like that help, because you really do not need to know their exact location. That opens you up to privacy issues. And then also transparency is a very important one. You want to make sure, like, you're providing transparency about what things are doing. So for instance, I'm sure, like, if you have iPhones, you see, like, Apple like sends you this prompt basically saying, "Oh, do you want to limit access to your photos or things like that kind of thing you get?" It's like transparency, because again, like, we don't really need to provide this full thing. And the example I used basically was like, okay, now with this like sharing with friends and everything, do you want to provide the entire contact list? And think you said that kind of thing. That's a form of kind of like transparency to allow to give like control to the users, but also provide them context to what's actually happening, which is very, very important. So yeah, I've said a lot, but just to wrap things up, security protects systems, privacy protects people. If we build secure systems that misuse data, we've only solved half the problem. So as security engineers, as just people that care about the world or whatever, we should also think about fighting for ourselves, individuals. So yeah, I know that was a lot of information, but thank you so much, and I hope at least you got at least one thing from this presentation.
All right, thank you very, very much, Modupe. Thank you. I learned a lot myself, and I'm pretty sure everyone here also learned a lot. We have, I think, everybody here is mostly an application security engineer, so it was very, very interesting. Some things you mentioned were new, some were, familiar, and it was. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing this with us. So, now to the audience, please, do we have any questions? Do you have a question or two that you want to ask Modupe? So if you do have a question, please you could just either raise your hands or just turn on your mic and ask your questions. We'll have questions briefly. Any questions? You can ask a question on how you think, in case you are not clear on something specific about what Modupe has said, you can just ask a question so she can clear that up. But outside of this, maybe you can't think of a question now. Later on, you could still just reach out to us with your questions, and I'm pretty sure Modupe will be very happy to give you an answer even after this webinar has ended. Um, if there are no questions, me, I have questions for Modupe. So okay, we'll be wrapping up soon. Mm. Right. So I think the questions I even have, Modupe has answered it in some way, right? Because she also mentioned, and I loved the case studies you did. It was technical. I liked it. I liked the way you were able to tie it back to what we actually do. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, okay, for example, for AppSec engineers that are here or those in the future that actually want to say, okay, I want to start, doing what I do in AppSec with privacy in mind. Now in AppSec, we already do, a couple of things relating to privacy. We do, when you have to conduct a threat model of an application, you have to think of things. For example, okay, we know this is how data flows from here to here. We have the client, we have the server, the kind of data we are collecting. We have to think of risks peculiar to that data we are collecting. And then we have to say, oh, is this data needed? If it's needed, how can we go about it? And then, we mostly work with compliance too. So in a way, which is why I said it's very, very, very similar. Although you guys, you guys are very deep in the privacy work. So I think you also answered that question that I had. So I just noted down one more question because you already answered that. Okay, we have one from Badmus. Okay, Muduba, should I read it out or?
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes, you can read it out.
All right, so the first is from Badmus. Badmus is a very, very is our boss here. Badmus is an AppSec engineer too, and he has done a lot of work in the industry. I don't know if you've heard about the I think the vulnerable mobile banking application. Badmus, sorry if I don't remember the name of your Apple, but Badmus has done a lot of work in the industry. So his question is, The privacy engineers do technical hands-on activities like going into servers, logs to see how data is stored or logged, etc. Or these questions are asked for software engineers to provide.
So yes. So again, like I just want to point out, like we wear multiple hats, and that's the point of saying that because my day doesn't look the same. Like some days I'm just like, diving into technical documentation from software engineers, and just like talking to them and trying to gain context. Some days it's more like I'm actually like looking at your data and trying to find problems and like coming up with solutions to those problems. Like so proof of concept. So it's mix and match. Sometimes I'm building systems to help solve privacy problems. So some days I'm more like I can be a lawyer in some sense. Some days where I'm just like talking about regulation, yada yada yada. Some days I'm actually like doing more like red teaming work, privacy red teaming work in that sense, like trying to find problems, break systems, and whatever it is. So nowadays I'm more of a software engineer. So yeah, we do get like our hands dirty like every single time. That's what differentiates us from like regular privacy specialists because we actually look into the data, we actually understand your system because most of us come from like a software engineering background or a security background. So we understand how to think through these things and we know what to spot. Like, it's different just like seeing regulation and understanding, this and that versus like actually knowing how this works in like real systems and knowing, okay, you know what, this is actually maybe difficult. Let me think of how to actually help you address this problem. So that's what we do. We are more software engineer facing in that sense. So like they are majorly our POCs in that sense. So yeah.
All right, thank you very, very much. We have a question from Justin. I don't know if Modupe we have an answer for this. So, he's saying, any clue why privacy isn't taken seriously in this part of the world? I think it's a big deal here in Nigeria. I don't think they care about that. If we went to talk about privacy engineering in Nigeria,
So, so funny enough, so I actually had like a different presentation like earlier this year too, and it was more regulation or policy focused. And I was talking about how basically like it was like on it's more like a panel, anything, if anything. We're talking about how like last year was very, very important for privacy in Nigeria because it was the year of they call the year of the teeth, basically, because we've had like NDPA or like the NDPR previously called since like I think 2021 or 2023 or so. So like the law or regulation already existed. But again, implementation is really hard in Nigeria because again, corruption, blah blah blah. But like last year, for some reason, they started taking things seriously, at least for the bigger players. So like there was a case between I think it was Femi Falana and Meta, where they actually sued Meta regarding like some privacy issues. Not that like I know there's conflicts about whether that's more of a copyright thing versus like a piracy thing, but again, it was still very, very big because one thing about you see like in this like about like laws and sorry like cases or whatever like laws regulations is that it's all about the precedents you set. So once one thing happens, one major thing happens, it opens up like this chain for other things to happen. So the fact is that we don't really like Nigerians. I feel like we have bigger problems. I can't even lie that happen in the world. We don't really have the luxury, I guess, of thinking about privacy. Like when I'm in traffic and I'm fighting somebody, like is privacy really my problem? So like that might be and definitely like is a factor. But like as things like get better, like and even without things getting better, people need to actually stand up and like make people care about it. Sometimes also it's also about like lack of awareness. Not everybody knows that they have the right to delete their data. People, I promise you, if you walk on the street and just like ask people, hey, do you know what rights you have regarding your privacy? They'll just look at you and eye you because like what are you talking about? Like they don't really know. It's more about like awareness and just like providing awareness to people. So like talking about these things, you start by like caring about this particular subject. Look into things. When you talk to your friends, bring this up, and they're like, oh, okay, I never heard about that. They also go and look into it, and then this chain keeps on going, keeps on flowing. So yeah, that's at least a short answer to why I think we don't care about it in Nigeria.
thank you very much, Modupe. That was a very, very detailed answer, and I agree with it very much. I believe we should all be advocates for privacy. I think it starts with us, right? The change we want to see, it definitely starts with us, right? And I also wanted to say something. What you were saying, Modupe, reminded me of something. At work, at one point in time, we're building an application, right? And developers were building so far, and they had not, focused on how users can delete their data from the application. But compliance states, it's because it's for a foreign based company and you have to allow them delete their data. If they want to get rid of their data and get rid of the app, you have to give them that decision. And you know what the developer said? Developers were like, why do we allow them do this? It's bad for the business. We should not, Nigerian developers like, no, they should not delete their they should not delete their data, right? Which is at that point they don't have awareness, right? On that point of what privacy entails at that point in time, on how serious privacy really is. Saying we should not let users delete their data because it would affect the business, that's something that I believe that we should, we can start within our teams, right? For those of us that are working in teams, start within our teams. We should definitely adopt a privacy mindset in our approach to application security. I believe we can all be privacy engineers in the end. So thank you very, very much, Modupe. We do have another question, but I think we have 4 minutes left for this meeting to end. Modupe, do you think you can answer this question in a minute so we can quickly wrap up?
Yeah, I can. So how does like AI ML change the privacy engineering landscape? Well, it changes it a lot. Someone that I look up to basically was talking one day and said something that was so interesting. And like I always say this to people, like when they ask about this question, it's like AI thrives on more data, privacy thrives on less data. So it's a conflict. Like think about this. Like there are things regarding like the privacy space that we cannot solve because of like model training. For example, when you think about privacy, you have, a retention limitation. How do you set a retention policy for a trained data set that you've already trained for a model? You cannot just go and say you want to delete the data or, automatically delete the data. Like, or for instance, like purpose limitation. How does that work when training models? Like, those are problems that we've not still addressed. So it makes it harder. It's not necessarily like completely different. There are things that we can still like think about, but there are new interesting problems to think about. And even like just thinking about AI safety in general, there are so many other things to consider regarding like AI safety. Like I was talking about this with somebody yesterday. I sent like a 30-minute voice note about it. And like my friend joke about this thing saying that, oh, don't ever mention privacy and AI safety to Dupe because you never stop talking. Because I have so many opinions. But yeah, it does change it. But like what we've seen, we saw it happen in the security space where when emerging technologies come out, we don't necessarily think about the risk. We are so excited by the possibilities that we forgot to like stop and like actually like look into the systems, and that's why it's a different problem because like um LLMs have been proven to memorize data. Like it's like they do memorize it in case you're not aware. So like personal data. So example, if you're talking to a GPT, you're providing personal information, you know that it's memorizing that data. So they have been proven. So there are more interesting problems that we have there, but not necessarily completely different. Like we're just building on things that we already have. And just to add to what Praise said about like that conflict between business needs and privacy, there's always going to be that conflict. Like that's one thing you need to realize. Like leadership or top level whatever professionals will never, or like top level business leaders will never completely understand privacy because they are thinking more about profits. So your job is trying to translate privacy to what they understand, like oh, you lose money if they find you, things like that. So that's your job because they'll never necessarily understand or even value it like you do, but you just have to find a way to translate it to what they understand so that they can actually consider that. So
All
yeah.
right. Thank you very much, Murupe. You did that in time. I was about to reach out to you. So thank you everyone for joining us today. For those that are in the community, Murupe, please would you share these slides with us so we could send it back to the community for those that were not around today.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much for
Yeah.
your time. We hope to have you soon again, Mudupe. In the future, we hope to bring you back here so you can share more of your knowledge on privacy with us. Thank you for everyone that joined today. Thank you, thank you. I think we've come to the end of this session today. Thank you, Modupe, for your time. All right, bye everyone. Bye. Jesus.